Let's shout now.
Make sure the sound's off. We're finally live. Well, welcome. I understand that there's that as I was preparing for this topic, I was writing going, actually this is useful for students as well. So I understand I've got some students here and I've got some teachers here, and everyone is welcome. Some things will be more useful than others to students and parents, but of course hopefully it's all beneficial in some way. I do apologize if my throat goes. I'm coming off the end of a bit of a cold. So with no further ado, I will share screen and this will work. So oh, that wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to go full screen, which will happen here. I have included excerpts from an ABRSM exam. It is 1975, so it's not the current syllabus at all. However, grade 1 is generally consistent across AMEB, ABRSM, and Trinity. So I thought this way we can use something that is not regarded as a copyright issue, but it gives us something to just look at broadly. So the basic categories in the ABRSM syllabus for theory are the basics of notation, simple time signatures, major keys and scales, and terms and signs. So we'll go through each of those and talk about teaching them. So with notation, a lot of students seem to learn mnemonics without actually understanding how the notation system works. Get the student, and really, if you understand how and why it works, reading notes is quite easy. And I thought I'd cover this first because grade 1 is so much about notation, isn't it? But when students come to me going, every good boy deserves fruit, they don't really always understand what's going on with that. So there's a few ways of teaching note reading in other than using mnemonics, and one is using phonics. I say that a bit broadly. I'm obviously stealing. When we teach a child, we say this is A goes ah, and yet when we're teaching note readings, we go, oh, every good boy deserves fruit. We don't ever use mnemonics when we're teaching kids how to read. So why don't we use a phonics approach when we're teaching music? And this is how I first started teaching, when I started realizing that how we taught phonics, and that worked. This was when phonics was becoming quite popular in New South Wales. And so I thought, how can I apply this knowledge that I'm learning in these phonics courses for phonics teaching to music? So this is C, and here's my picture of middle C. And C goes, can you sing C for me?
La.
La. C. C goes C. What does C look like? Let's describe what C looks like, just the same way we would describe what A looks like, we would draw what A looks like if we were teaching them to read English. So this is C, C goes C. What does C look like? It has a sword going through its head, it's hanging below all the lines, something like that, so that they're learning what C looks like as a picture rather than what C looks like as part of a mnemonic. And similar with D. This is D, D goes
La.
La.
So you say C.
Actually, D. What does it look like? Well, D is below all the lines. So this can be, in a Vygotsky sense, this can be a discussion of how do the notes look? A, how can we describe it? Oh, look, it's on top of the second line, but below the third line, so that the child is processing and thinking about the image of the note as opposed to where it is in the mnemonic, and so on. There's no right and wrong answer to how a child describes the note if it's a description in a pictorial sense. So now the other way is using history, and I've put up some historical manuscripts. And the thing is, if we look at the first image that I have here, there is no lines. So there's no reference point. So how on earth does the singer know what they're singing? And the fact of the matter was they didn't. They knew the song already. So these neumes were used by singers to remind them of how the chant went, rather than actually to learn the chant and sight read. That it was impossible. So then they start putting reference lines in, and you can see in the second picture there's one line. So, but with one line, if we look where my cursor is, I'm assuming you can see where my cursor is, sort of. That some of these notes are very far above the reference line. So how do we figure out what that interval is here? Well, not easily. So as time went on, they added extra lines, and I'm going to zoom in on this on another page, but you can see that the red line here has an F in front of it, and hopefully my cursor, it's not very clear, is it? Let me annotate. Annotate.
It's a bit hard to see, you can see it. But
yeah, it's a bit hard. So what if I do a yellow? So you can see, no, that doesn't work. Blue, here we go. So where my blue circle is, and I'll just try that again, that's an F. So at the front of this red line, the composer or the scribe has put an F to say this is F. And now from this F, we can easily go down F, so there's E, there's D. So lines were invented as a graph so that we could identify a note and then move up or down from that note. Now, the very last picture I've included, because this is a G clef, and I don't know if you can see, this actually comes from the Guidonian hand image. And if you can see, it's actually a G with a very pretty little squiggle on it. So when they marked G, and underneath there's a cursive G, which is a bit chopped off. I couldn't stop PowerPoint doing that. But you can see the similarity. The G clef or the treble clef is just a G. And if we put this F on any other line, it would become the F. So if we move the F or we move the G clef, we move that note. So it acts as a reference to the spacing. So why did it not? Now it did. So similarly with the F clef. Now I've zoomed in on the two images now. And you can see, just stop annotating. You can see here that the G a lot closer, and you can see the cursive G. And kids these days use fonts and typing, and calligraphy is not such a big part of the curriculum as it used to be. But hopefully even kids can see, oh, this is how they draw a fancy G. My G clef is a fancy G with a squiggle and then another squiggle down there. And there's just a closer image of some music where the F is clearly on display. And you'll notice, of course, that they've put the F on a red line to be nice and helpful. Some music has F and C, both marked. Now, actually, for those of us who are old enough to remember writing cursive, a cursive F looks like an F clef, a bass clef, because you have that bit that goes on this side of the F, like that. And then when you place a quill, it leaves like a blob there and there. So the blob was when I put my quill on the page and then I drew a line across. And suddenly the F is starting to look a lot more like the bass clef we're familiar with. So, oh, my mouse has got somewhere funny. Why is my, oh, I don't know.
So it's connected to that.
Something's happening, yeah. Okay. So we can think about reading music just like reading the Cartesian plane. Kids, depending on their age, know how to read a Cartesian plane. They learn how to read number lines very early in school. And there are actually studies that show that mnemonics only increase the speed of response at some stages in the learning process. Not all stages. In some, using every good boy deserves fruit will give them the right answer quickly in the beginning, but as time goes on, actually it's slowing them down, as opposed to a Cartesian sort of system, or a system where you're looking at the stave as though it's a graph with a clef that tells us what note where our reference point is. That in the long run, using that sort of system is a lot faster. Oh yes, so I've gone on about this because I think the every good boy deserves fruit is so ingrained in most theory books have a page on it. But if we say A, B, C, D, F, G, and then we say every good boy deserves fruit, There are more syllables in Every Good Boy Deserves Fruit, so it takes longer to say anyway than to say A, B, C, D, E, F, G and count up the stave. And there are studies, and I won't go into this, but my previous talk on memory investigated this a bit further, that there are studies that link the number of syllables in something to your ability to recall it. So because the second one has more syllables, it's slower to store in the memory. So an alternative is that I've seen some teachers use is that they learn to say the alphabet by skipping letters. So A, C, E, G, B, D, F, and getting quick at skipping by twos so that you can skip by twos in the graph. So another thing about the mnemonic in this particular case is that Every Good Boy has no relation to the meaning of the names of the notes. So mnemonics, studies have shown that mnemonics can be helpful when they are somehow related to the material that's being learnt. However, I didn't actually look in for examples of that for this talk, so you'd have to go looking if you're interested to delve further in that. Again, identifying features of the notes, such as ears on the big bottom line, helps the brain to start to process that there is a different look. When we put our notes on this stave, each of them does have a different look. So if we can identify them, draw them, talk about them, then our students are going to start saying, oh yeah, I can see the difference because I know that one's on the bottom line there. The clefs, the G and the F clef, traditionally moved around. Now, it's always nice for our students to know that the G clef no longer moves around. Unless you start playing early music, it's always going to be on the second line, and the bass clef is always going to be on where F is on the second top line. So I just wanted to mention that mnemonics in education is debated. It's not all negative, but their long-term effectiveness has been questioned a lot. Short-term effectiveness, however, is proven. So if you're trying to cram for a test or learn a whole heap of history facts that really you probably don't need to memorize for your life's betterment, then mnemonics can be incredibly helpful for that. So the question we have to ask ourselves as musicians teaching our students for theory is, do we want them just to pass the exam, or do we want them the long-term goal, which is them to become good readers? So I'll leave that there. So here's an example question from our real early paper. Obviously these days the papers are online, but give the letter names of the notes. So I thought I just put, for any students in the room, the tip, the things we need to check for. We write sharp G, but we say G sharp. So here where my cursor is, there's a sharp and then there's a G, but we don't say sharp G, we say G sharp. Also, always check for any sneaking accidentals that are hiding earlier in the bar. If I look at this G here, it looks like a G because there's no G sharp on it, but I go back. There's my sneaky accidental that snuck in. The other thing about accidentals is they have a use by date. They always expire on the bar line. So in the next bar, if my composer wants to say G sharp, again, he has to mark it, and there he's marked it again. So the next thing is note values. Now, a question I asked my teacher was, why do notes have such stupid names? And of course, there was no Google in those days. So she said, I don't know. Or I think she said, it just is the name. That's it. And I just had to accept that. But I'm never quite happy with an answer like that. So I always like to talk about the breve. The breve is a brief note. You know, there was a maxima and there was a longer, so a long note and a maximum note. But as more and more note divisions started happening, the long notes became shorter. So semi-breve means half a short note or half a breve. So, and then minim is minimum. It's a word we already know in our vocabulary. So minim is the minimum note. Of course, it's not anymore, but that's why it was called that. And then there was the crotchet. Now, the crotchet is named after a hook, like crochet hook, hence the picture, but we don't have a hook on it anymore. And quavers, they're fast like quivering. And then semi-quaver obviously is half of the quaver. So these English names, which seem so random, actually all have a meaning. Now, naming the key. The naming the key situation is quite simple in grade 1. I think it's 1 sharp, and 2 sharps and 1 flat and 2 flats. So it's quite simple, and students can just rote learn that. But I suggest that to start by learning to draw a circle of fifths, even if you're only drawing parts of it, that learning to derive the circle of fifths will set them up for what is to come. So they may not learn the whole circle, or they might. I usually go with the whole circle, and when we talk it out and we figure it out, oh, this one's a fifth higher. Okay, let's figure it out. You know, when we're learning maths equations and physics equations, it's the same. You know, you can either memorize the equation or you can learn how to derive the equation. And learning how to derive the equation is always more stable, because then you don't get stuck in the exam going, oh my goodness, I don't remember the equation for velocity of a falling object. Not looking at any physics students to my left. So drawing a chart is the same. If they learn to draw the circle of fifths and understand that these things work in patterns of fifths, then that gives them a really secure foundation for what's going on. But, you know, there are only a few scales, so drilling them is a possibility. But personally, I like to set a really strong foundation here, that the scales work in this way. And then, you know, even if they've only meant part of the circle, at least they know what is the circle and they know what's going to happen next. I always also encourage students who are in the room that when you start the exam, I think you're allowed blank paper in the online exam, but in paper-based exams, draw the circle of fifths straight away. Before you start, draw the circle of fifths. It's there then on the paper as your reference point for anything that comes up in the exams. So here's an example. We've been asked to identify the key. So what I like to do is I like to write down the side. What accidentals do I actually see? Oh, I see F sharp. Let's write it down there. So that I've got, oh, this is the sharp in the piece, but maybe there's more sharps in the piece that they haven't marked. So write down each note. So D, G, I've already written D, I've already written G, A, I can write that down, B, I can write that down. In case there's a missing one, so in this, which one's this? Oh, this is the first one. The E is missing. There's no E in this particular piece. So maybe that E is an E flat, or maybe that E is an E sharp, I don't know yet. But now that I see there's only one F sharp, so there is a scale that fits that perfectly. But sometimes we get one in a higher grade where the E missing is really significant. So this is, and it can be a clue. So that's why I write all of those things down the side or on our blank working paper. So, you know, this is only grade 1. So what my suggestion is that by doing something which will work in the higher grades, like noticing which note is missing, and maybe, now that I think about it, maybe that could be written with a circle around it because it doesn't appear in the scale. So that, you know, this is one that could be either or in our scale. But grade 1 is not very complicated. You see a sharp, it's pretty much a giveaway. So, or a flat. Identifying the time signatures. Now, the first thing when we have to identify time signatures is to try and identify the beat. When we're only talking about grade 1, so, you know, the choices, the range of choices that the student has is limited. We're giving them the safety to explore with only a limited number of choices. So they only have crotchet beats. So we don't need to so much identify it at this level, but we're circling each crotchet beat. And this circling is sort of overkill. So that it seems like overkill because all the beats are crotchets anyway. But setting up a habit of circling the beats is, again, that helps when we get to grade 5, when rhythms get very complicated. So after we've circled them, we count how many circles are in the bar. And for the students, always avoid the first and last bar. Because if there's an anacrusis, then the first bar is going to be only part of a bar and the last bar is only going to be part of a bar. So always start after the first bar line. And you can check a few bars as well to make sure they all agree. If they don't agree, you probably made a mistake with your circling. So I thought I'd include here word names for rhythms that are 1 crotchet long. There are a few different systems of for rhythms, and there's French time names that Kodai uses and things like that. This is my set of words, and other teachers probably have a lot more creative than this. But caterpillar, 4 semiquavers makes 1 crotchet. So that's 1 beat. And if you look closely, you can see the caterpillar's feet. And there's his body. He's just missing his antennas. And then bulldozer, that's 1 crotchet beat. Chocolate, that's 1 crotchet beat. Pin, well, that's a crotchet. Staple, that's 1 crochet beat. Strawberry, a triplet, and on. Yeah, a bit hard to say when you're saying one word. And look, my slide says sample footer text. Anyway, so that obviously not all those are necessary for this level exam. I don't think there are triplets at this level, but ABRSM has semiquavers in this grade, so I find that words are easy to learn, and then they can compose patterns of rhythms to get used to them, and then you can look at the music and go, I can see a caterpillar there. I know I've got 1 beat to circle. So I thought I'd draw circles. Here we go. So if I'm looking at this 3-4-1 here, obviously I can draw my crotchets, but when I look at a dotted note, I do this, draw a crotchet here, and this dot is half a crotchet. So he's going to join that one there. And there's a bit of creativity with how you want to do a 3-count note. And say, oh my goodness, I've seen a caterpillar. So I know that that's 1 crotchet beat. And then this is an erase. Actually, I didn't put that one on my first chart. So this is grade 1. So they are using those rhythms. Erase, staple, erase, min. And we can't see the one down below, but that's a 3/8, which is no longer in grade 1. So some suggestions for dealing with once we've done these rhythms. I mean, we can just do them and get the answer right, or we draw our circles, identify any rhythm words that we recognize, clap the rhythms, and if the range works, play it on whatever our instrument is as well. Get some bonus sight reading practice along with our theory practice. And adding rests. So adding rests, I find it's helpful. I think what happened was, I was very good at maths, and then I started teaching people that weren't as good at maths as I was, and that to me was so bizarre. As a very young teacher, so how can I teach rhythm to people who can't just see it and mathematically calculate it? And that's how this circle method was born. So here, we need to add the correct rest. So firstly, I'll put in my circles. There's 1. I can see 1 there. There's 1. So now I know that I've got a circle, and then I can check my circles in a different color. This one's full, yay. This one's not full, but this one's full and this one's full. So I've only got 1, and then this note is worth half. So then I need to do a maths 1 minus a half, which hopefully I can manage at this level. Oh, rest, it said. On live stream, I completely mucked up when I was talking about rest. No, it's excellent. So this one can be hard, but here I can see a caterpillar, so I can go this end. I can see another caterpillar. I can see my caterpillar. Oh my goodness, this one's not full. So then I can put my rest at the front. So always look for whole circle groups. Don't start at the beginning, oh my goodness, where's the circle going to go? Look for groups to recognize, this is a whole circle, this is a whole circle. And then we can figure out where the placements are for the circles with empty spots. Of course, another option, which is for those who are good with maths, but I shouldn't say but. I know for myself, when I'm thinking about maths and it's not written down on the page, sometimes if there's too many things, I just can't think about it unless I can see it. So we can write it. Well, this is 1 part of a beat. This is half part of a beat. So I need to finish that half plus a half. And so I know this has to be a half rest. That's another option which can work up in the higher grades as well. So, apologies. Rest rules. Never, ever, ever have a rest that covers 2 circles or crosses from one circle to the other. So, where's my drawing? So if here's my 2 circles, I can't do this. That's a crotchet rest. So I can't put a crotchet rest across two circles like that. So the ABRSM Rudiments of Music Theory 1961 says every beat has its own rest. There is an exception, and it gives the exception that beats 1 and 2 can be joined as a minim in 4/4 time, as can 3 and 4. But never, ever, ever, ever in 1 million years can you join circles 2 and 3. In 3/4 time, each circle gets its own rest. Now, this is where engraving schools come in, and for whatever exam you're doing, you need to be sure what their engraving school is. There are some engraving schools that say 1 in 3/4 time or 3/8 time, that circle 1 and 2 can be joined. But still, the never, ever, ever join circles 2 and 3 holds in those schools as well. And a semi-brief rest is a whole bar rest no matter what the time signature is. So there's basic rest rules. Okay, now teaching Italian words. One of the big things I think with teaching Italian words is that English and Italian have Latin roots. So there are so many commonalities in the words that we can find. The easiest way I do this is just to Google search the etymology of a word. That's where it came from. Now I can see both this English and the Italian word. So, but we always have to be aware of false cognates. So when there's a false cognate, we want to mark it, we want to drill it. So some examples. Piano is the word plain. So, and soft is plain. Whereas forte is the same word as fort or stronghold. So it means strong, but of course we translate it as loud. Largo is the word large. So the notes are larger, and therefore we're going to translate it as slow. And gusto, this is a false cognate. Con gusto does not mean with gusto. So not that that's not in this grade, but I'm just bringing it up because there are false cognates that we have to be careful of in the vocabulary. Okay, then writing scales. So this question says, write the scale to this rhythm. So really important to be aware that there's one note per alphabetical letter. And sometimes students miss that. And they say, but wait, E sharp is F. But one note, every alphabetical name has a note. It always goes line, space, line, space, line, space. If you ever see a space, space, or a line, line, ba-bum, you haven't got all your notes in alphabetical order. It's also an excellent habit to write out a circle of fifths to identify the key signature of the scale, even though we are in grade 1. So, or a part of a circle of fifths. Also, always double check. In the old days, I used to say, underline the word accidentals if you see it, or underline the word key signature so you don't forget and do the wrong one. Actually, it's harder with an online exam because there's a lot of working that we actually do with a pen and paper. And there's a lot of thinking and there's a lot of learning that goes with a pen and paper that doesn't happen in an online experience. So I don't think it's necessarily easier. Now, the next thing in the exam is writing tonic triads. And I had to put a picture of the cereal because I'm not sure, depending on which country people are from, whether they're familiar with this cereal. It's horrible and sugary for those who haven't tried it. So I'm not suggesting you try it. But writing tonic triads, a triad, tricycle, 3 notes. And so tonic triads look like Nutrigrain. So there's the Nutrigrain. You can see the tonic, the median, and the dominant all built on top of each other, or they look like traffic lights. They always go space, 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 or line, line, line. Now, there's an interesting thing about tonic triads, and that is that they are always spelt the same. And it doesn't matter which triad it is. If it starts on C, it's always going to be spelt keg. So this is when a story is very useful. Again, this is more keys than are necessary for this grade, but is still this, because it fits part of the story, right? So Clarence Kegg is the mayor of C major. Here he is. And then there's David Duffer. David Duffer always telling silly jokes. And Eric Egber, he has an egg-shaped head. And then Ferry Fack has a beautiful face. And Gary Gubbard, if a bit of creativity, turn the B on its side, and he's a good bloke, Gary. And then Archibald Ace is the racing car driver, and Barbara Budov is the Russian chord friend with her furry hat. So it's really good to drill that these are the chord patterns. Remember, when we get into grade 6, we're going to need to do 4-part harmony. And so I'm going to be asking my students to write down the front chord 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Keg, Duffer, Egber, Fack, Gubbard, Ace, Budov, and to get very fast at writing them. So getting to know them as people or characters means when we write a tonic triad, it's always going to be spelled C-E-G. Any C chord is going to be spelled C-E-G. It might be like hats, like C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, or if it's diminished or if it's augmented, but it's still C-E-G. Just the hats change, but the keg part doesn't change. That is actually the end of grade 1 exam. So there's not that much in it. And so hopefully for students listening, and I never welcome the people on the live stream, so apologies, welcome that you're here. And if you can check to see if there's any questions in the the forum. The triad characters are helpful, Viola, because it's so often we're arguing with students. Oh, yes, I know it's cool, it's an F, but it's really an E sharp. But if they know this is the only spelling, it's been quite effective. Well, I will open if you've got any questions. Not a very hard exam, but as teachers, setting the foundation, it says we want something we can build on. We don't want to just pass grade 1. We can pass grade 1, we can even get 100% and not actually know what that means. So hopefully the main thing that hopefully I wanted to get across today is that we want our students to know what things mean. It's great to have fun, obviously the characters are just silly, but behind it all, there's meaning. And we want meaning that we can build on, not when we get to grade 2 and we're saying, oh, actually I lied to you in grade 1 because I was simplifying it so you'd pass the exam. So if this foundation's here, hopefully the higher grades are easier. So does anyone have a question before we finish?